Nik Gauving, thank you for joining our program. The pandemic has brought us the health crisis and an economic one, and may cause the political crisis as well. What will our world look like when all this passes?
I don't just think this is a political crisis, it's potentially a societal crisis. We're dealing with unthinkables, unpalatables that no one was thinking of, particularly when it came to the unraveling of stability that many of us have taken for granted, particularly with the European Union and everything that's happened since the Second World War, and in your region since the wars of the early 90s. I think the tragedy is it's going to be about the ability of politics to adapt. I was warning, and we were warning in our project of Thinking the Unthinkable this time last year, early 2019, 2018, that people don't understand the enormity of what's coming down the track and the real challenge to the resilience. And I remember addressing 60 politicians from the European Union, from 27 nations in Vienna in February of 2019, warning them that politics was not flexible enough to understand the enormity of instability that was coming. I didn't know about a pandemic, but instability which was already unraveling at that time. And many of them wondered if I was smoking something. But several of them have already been in touch since the pandemic saying, you were right, we should have listened. I'm not convinced that the political class can adapt at the speed the public will expect, both on the economy, which is going to be in a terrible state.
Is the political class up to the task?
I'm not convinced that the political class is really flexible enough to appreciate the enormity of public expectations of what is needed to stabilize the economy, to give people money in their pockets, and then to create a stable society at the end of it. I'm not saying that in a pessimistic way, but a pragmatic way, a realistic way, because the political class have got to think in a very different way. People will expect governments to intervene. They will expect governments to stabilize the country as they're doing at the moment, spending vast amounts of money if they've got it, or they can generate the debt. But that's got to survive, and that means, including in the country where I'm sitting at the moment, in the United Kingdom, that means that all the free enterprise instincts of the centre-right and the right wing, particularly of, say, the Conservative Party of Britain, are going to be challenged now by what I would call a new form of socialist capitalism. You come from a country where many people expect the state to provide at least a basic level of functionality, including jobs in factories.
Yes,
that obviously has changed quite significantly. But you're going to see a large number of people who want security. And normally that will only now be provided by the state or institutions and corporates who are going to be funded by the state. In addition to which, there is an enormous pressure now from the public, which is building in ways which the politicians don't understand, on the climate change emergency, the climate emergency, sustainability. There are many, particularly the next generation, who are saying, look at how clean things have become without air travel, without cars, without the level of mobility, without the factories working. That's the way we want to keep it. That's going to be a massive challenge.
Will solidarity prevail, or we will see more authoritarian tough guys in the governments?
I don't think you need to be authoritarian to be tough. And obviously there are extremes emerging in Europe, in Hungary, and to a certain extent in Poland. But this is because what Orban has done in Hungary has appealed to the nationalist vanity of most Hungarians, not all, most Hungarians. And he has become very authoritarian as a result, which goes against all the principles of the European Union. I don't think democracy is dead, but democracy is going to have to show it can respond to public concern. I hope and believe that there is a probability that it doesn't require authoritarianism, but it requires a new form of political activity which understands the needs of society, of people who don't have money, who are going hungry, some of them are starving, who can't afford their rents, and they don't come from the 1% who are doing very well. These are people who have a vote, and if they see politics and political leaders who don't understand what their urgency is, what their anxieties are, what their basic needs are, then they will not be voted into power. Others will be voted in. It could be that authoritarians will take over. But remember, it's not going to be a post-COVID-19 environment. It's going to be living with COVID, living with the coronavirus, living with everything that we're having to endure at the moment. It isn't going to disappear fast. It's a new normal.
Did governments and international institutions failed in the response to this crisis?
You are asking two questions, one about international institutions failing us, another about governments failing us. On international institutions, certainly the Bretton Woods organizations, the World Bank and the IMF, could have been far more proactive. The G7 and the G20 could have been far more proactive. The European Union, in my view, could have been far more proactive, far quicker. And this comes down to all our work on thinking the unthinkable. What we've been through was simply not imaginable for most civil servants and certainly their political leaders. And they did not want to believe what was happening, even after what we saw emerging from China in Wuhan. I think this is the major disappointment, though, that international institutions simply haven't risen to the occasion, partly because of the fact that globalization is beginning to come apart. And certainly some leaders believe that if they're more nationalist, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, like Trump in his own way, then that will win them re-election and they will be voted for. I think President Trump and his attitude, whether it be on disinfectant, on the WHO, on demanding the sacking of his main medical leaders, his behavior has been despicable and totally what is not needed by a political leader at a time of crisis. But I come back to thinking the unthinkable. It was unthinkable, was it, that a pandemic would emerge, certainly at this kind of speed, in the way it did? Actually, no, it was predictable. The World Economic Forum and other risk registers were showing it was inevitable, but no one really wanted to believe it. And that is something which is going to pay, I think many politicians particularly, certainly those in government, will pay a very high price for, potentially, depending on what the election cycle is.
Mr. Gauving, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.